Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
They said law school was a luxury they couldn't afford. But guess who got a brand new Jeep when he turned 21? My brother, his third gap year in Costa Rica. Fully paid. Meanwhile, I got a pat on the back for working double shifts at Applebee's just to afford community college classes. So when I got that full ride to Columbia Law, I didn't tell them a damn thing. I packed my bags and ghosted my own family. No Christmas calls, no birthdays, nothing. I needed distance to finally breathe. Fast forward 8 years. I'm walking to work in downtown Phoenix, latte in one hand, case files in the other, and what do I see? My own damn face, smiling down from a billboard outside my parents' favorite grocery store. 2 days later, I get a voicemail. My mom's voice is shaking like she's seen a ghost. That's when it really hit me. After all those years of silence, I had all the power. But here's the thing. You think this is a story about success? Nah. This is a story about choices, about revenge, about learning that forgiveness might feel good, but silence, that shit hits different. I was 13 the first time I told them I wanted to be a lawyer. We were sitting around the dinner table, me, Mom, Dad, and Evan, my older brother, eating lasagna that Mom had pulled out of a freezer bag and thrown in the oven like it was some kind of gourmet dish. Dad was sipping his usual Coors, barely listening, while Evan went on and on about his new band that was going to blow up any day now. I don't know what possessed me to say it then. Maybe it was the way the conversation had died down, or maybe I was tired of waiting for them to care about what I had to say. I looked up from my plate and said it like a statement, not a question. I want to study law. There was a pause, just a second or two, but long enough to notice. Then Dad let out this low chuckle, like I'd said I wanted to fly to the moon. Law school, he said, not even looking at me. That's for rich kids, Rachel, not people like us. Mom smiled at him, like he'd just said something so wise, and added, "It's sweet that you're thinking big, honey, but let's be realistic. Law school is expensive." Then Evan, because of course Evan couldn't shut up, grinned and said, "Better marry rich, Rach." They all laughed. I didn't. I scraped the rest of the lasagna into the trash after dinner, staring at the sink full of dishes like it had personally betrayed me. That moment sat on my chest for years like a weight. It wasn't just that they didn't believe in me. It was that they didn't even consider believing in me. They didn't ask questions. They didn't offer ideas or support. They just dismissed me, like my ambition was a punchline. Meanwhile, Evan was on his second failed semester at the local community college, and they were planning to pay for his gap year trip to Costa Rica because he needed to clear his head. It was always Evan. Every conversation, every decision, every damn dollar. When he got arrested for shoplifting at 17, Dad said, "Boys make mistakes." When I got a B- in math, Dad said, "Maybe this college stuff isn't for everyone." Evan crashed Mom's car? He's just under a lot of pressure. I got accepted into AP History and wanted to celebrate. Don't get ahead of yourself. I started working part-time at 15. Hostessing at this sad little family diner off Route 21. The owner was a chain smoker with a mustache like a raccoon tail, and the tips were garbage, but I saved every penny. Not because I thought I could afford law school, that dream had quietly retreated to the back of my mind, but because I knew no one was going to save me. I bought my own textbooks when our schools were too old and falling apart. I paid for my SAT prep out of pocket. Evan, he got a brand new Jeep for his 21st birthday after dropping out for the second time. I didn't even get a card when I graduated high school with honors. I don't say all this to make you feel sorry for me. I'm saying it because it matters. It matters how these things add up over time, how they stack into a wall you eventually stop trying to climb over. You just sit there, behind it, watching everyone else get lifted up while you figure it out on your own. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Laramie, was the first adult who ever looked me in the eye and said, "You'd make a hell of a lawyer." She pulled me aside after debate practice one afternoon, this short woman with big glasses and a New Jersey accent sharp enough to cut glass. She handed me a folder of scholarship applications, leaned in, and said, If they won't help you, someone will. But you better be ready to grind. I nearly cried right there in her office. It was the first time in years I felt like maybe I wasn't crazy for wanting more. So I did grind. I worked full-time the summer after high school, then part-time through community college. I didn't party, didn't date, didn't complain, just tunnel vision. I transferred to a state school after 2 years and kept grinding. By 22, I was sitting in a silent library, reading an email over and over that felt too good to be true. Columbia Law, full ride, all expenses. They wanted me. I read it again, then again. I checked the sender to make sure it was real. Then I just sat there, surrounded by books and stale coffee air, and I laughed. Not loud, just a soft, bitter little laugh to myself. Because the first thing I thought about wasn't the years of hard work, or what I'd wear on my first day, or even how scared I was. The first thing I thought about was that night around the dinner table, the lasagna, the laughter, Evan's smug face. Better marry rich, Rach. I didn't tell them, not a word. No email, no phone call, no Facebook post. I packed up my things in silence, left a small note on the kitchen counter the night before I moved. It said, "Don't worry, I've got it covered." And you know what? They didn't call, they didn't write. For all they knew, I could have disappeared. They didn't even notice I was gone. The thing about disappearing is, you expect it to cause a ripple, some reaction, some echo of your absence. I didn't leave in the dead of night, but it felt like it. I'd loaded everything I owned into the trunk of a borrowed Honda with a dented fender and a cracked taillight, my clothes folded in black garbage bags, and one suitcase with a broken zipper held shut by a belt. I taped the note to the fridge like a damn receipt. Don't worry, I've got it covered. Not angry, not emotional, just surgical, cold, final. I told myself they'd see it, panic, call the police maybe, or at the very least, shoot off a text to ask what I meant. But the silence that followed was so complete, so absolute, it felt like someone had sucked all the air out of the world and left me suspended in a vacuum. I waited 3 days, then 5, then 2 weeks, nothing, no call, no message, no knock on my door. I told myself maybe they were giving me space, or maybe they assumed I was off sulking somewhere and would come crawling back like I always had before. But deep down, I knew. I knew that I had been so easy to ignore for so long that my absence was just a slightly quieter version of my presence. Columbia was everything I had dreamed and everything I hadn't prepared for. It wasn't just the classes or the crushing weight of expectation or the fact that everyone around me had names that opened doors before they even spoke. It was the loneliness, the bone-deep, echoing kind of loneliness that sits in your chest and buzzes like a swarm of bees. My classmates talked about their parents like safety nets. Emergency credit cards, legacy recommendations, unspoken promises of holiday breaks back home. I had a microwave, a dorm the size of a closet, and a job in the campus law library shelving books until 2 in the morning. And yet, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to earn the right to want more. I was allowed to want. That was a revelation. But the wanting didn't make the silence from home any easier to swallow. Sometimes I would stare at my phone, scrolling through my mom's contact name, mom, home, and my thumb would hover over it for a long time. Not because I wanted to call, but because I wanted to feel something. Rage, resentment, love, anything. But all I felt was this hollow curiosity. Like when you look at a picture of someone you used to know, but can't remember why they mattered. Evan's contact was still saved too, though I hadn't touched it since high school. His profile picture was him grinning with sunglasses on, standing next to that Jeep they'd given him after he totaled Mom's old Corolla. I remember the fight they had that night. Mom cried, Dad yelled, and Evan went out drinking anyway. I cleaned up the broken glass in the kitchen while they argued upstairs. That image had been branded onto me. And yet here I was, thousands of miles away, with no one even noticing that I had erased myself. The first time I felt vindicated wasn't during an exam or when a professor praised my research. It was when I overheard two students in the hallway talking about a case study we were all struggling with. One of them, a tall guy with Wall Street hair and a Rolex that could pay for a year's rent, said, "We should just ask Rachel Grady. She already cracked it." I didn't even know they knew my name. That single moment, it hit harder than any family holiday ever had. For the first time, I wasn't Evan's sister or the quiet girl or the one who won't stop trying. I was just better. I stopped checking my phone after that. I buried myself in books and cold brew coffee and the rush that came from being the smartest person in the room. It was intoxicating. Every high mark felt like a slap across my father's disapproving face. Every professor's compliment echoed louder than Evan's endless list of excuses. I was carving out a name for myself in a world that didn't even know where I came from. And that was the point. I didn't want them to know. Not yet. Still, nights were the worst. I'd be lying if I said I didn't sometimes lie awake and imagine what it would be like to get a call. Just one. A voicemail even. Something that sounded like regret. Or maybe like love. But nothing came. My inbox was full of Columbia announcements, internship alerts, and job boards. My voicemail? Empty. Then came the news about Evan. It was a random Tuesday. I was between classes, standing in line for coffee at a bodega, when I saw his name trending on Twitter. Not some big viral moment, just a local news tag. 26-year-old man hospitalized after DUI crash in South Carolina. The picture was blurry, but it was him. Sunglasses, that same dumb grin. The Jeep wasn't even recognizable. I stared at the screen until my coffee went cold. I waited to feel something again. Concern, guilt, fear. I didn't feel any of those things. All I felt was confirmation. That this is what happens when people never hear the word no. That this is what you get when you raise someone like he was royalty and treat their little sister like a cautionary tale. I thought about calling, just to see if he was okay, but then I imagined my mom answering, her voice full of trembling, performative sadness. I imagined Dad's gruff tone, pretending nothing was wrong. And suddenly the thought made me sick. They still hadn't called me, not even after their golden boy almost killed himself in a drunk driving crash. Not to tell me, not to ask for help, not even to pretend like we were still a family. That's when it truly hit me. I hadn't lost them. I'd simply outgrown them. People think silence is passive, that it's the absence of noise. But silence, when chosen, when owned, is power. It's the sound of control, and I was starting to understand just how good it felt. I wasn't going to reach out. I wasn't going to play the role of the concerned daughter or forgiving sister. I wasn't going to answer for a family that had never once asked the right questions. And the longer the silence lasted, the more I realized it wasn't empty. It was peace. There's a strange kind of quiet that follows years of unresolved pain, like the kind that lingers after a long storm, where the sky is clear, but the ground is still soaked, where nothing's falling anymore, but you know the damage isn't over. It's just paused. That was the quiet I lived in for years after law school, after passing the bar, after stepping into a life I had to claw my way into, without so much as a flashlight handed to me by the people who were supposed to show me the way. I had left them behind in silence, and the silence had become something permanent, like a piece of furniture in a room you forget you own because you stopped looking at it. After graduation, I didn't do what people expect. I didn't take a victory lap or fly to Bali like some of my classmates did, flashing their boarding passes on Instagram like they were holding lottery tickets. I took a job in Phoenix at a small but fiercely competitive firm that handled commercial litigation and high-stakes family law, cases that often turned into emotional brawls in conference rooms more than they ever did inside courtrooms. It suited me, the pressure, the controlled conflict, the way you could prepare so meticulously that it looked effortless when you delivered. I didn't want peace. I wanted proof. Proof that I hadn't just survived without them, I had thrived. The firm grew fast, and I grew with it. I worked weekends, stayed late, missed birthdays and holidays without even flinching. I became someone people whispered about, not because I was cruel or unapproachable, but because I was so damn sharp it made people nervous. They'd come to me with the messiest cases, the ones with weeping clients and betrayals and prenups scrawled on bar napkins. And I would sit there calmly, stitching the narrative together like I was patching up something broken. I was good. I was better than good. And for the first time, people saw me as irreplaceable. When we decided to launch a branding campaign, I didn't think much of it. I sat in a small office with a marketing rep who asked me to smile just enough, not too much, not too cold. They took my picture against a gray backdrop, wrote up a blurb about my career trajectory, and that was it. A few weeks later, I saw my face for the first time, looking down at me from a billboard on East Camelback Road, not far from the courthouse. Rachel Grady, Justice Done Right. I laughed when I saw it, not because it was funny, but because it felt like this bizarre, full-circle hallucination, like a postcard, from an alternate reality where I mattered the way I always knew I should have. Then 2 days later, I got the voicemail. It came late. I had just gotten home from work, kicked off my heels, poured a glass of wine, and was halfway through removing my makeup when my phone buzzed with a missed call from an unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't have even listened. But something made me check it. Some little twitch in the back of my mind, like a gut reaction that hadn't quite forgotten its training. The voice was unmistakable, though it sounded smaller, older, cracked at the edges. "Rachel, it's your mother." She paused, and in that pause was something I hadn't heard from her in decades: hesitation. I saw your picture on the billboard. I didn't know. You looked beautiful, sweetheart. We had no idea you were even in Phoenix. Her breath caught, and for a second it sounded like she was crying, but trying hard not to let it show. "Please, if you hear this, please call me, just please." I stood there frozen, holding the phone like it was a bomb that hadn't gone off yet. I played it again. Then again, the words didn't change, but something inside me did. I wasn't ready for it. Not because I missed her, or because I suddenly wanted to hear about Evan or Dad or whatever was going on back in that house I had walked away from, but because that voice, the one that had always been so certain, so aligned with his, so quick to dismiss or correct or ignore me, was shaking. She sounded like someone who'd seen a ghost. I didn't call her back. Instead, I saved the voicemail and transferred a copy to my laptop. I labeled it Mother First Call and locked it in a folder that no one else would ever find. I didn't know why I saved it. Maybe I just wanted proof. Or maybe I liked having her voice captured like that, vulnerable and small, after so many years of acting like I had nothing worth noticing. The irony wasn't lost on me, of course, that it took a 10-foot version of my face staring down at her from above a traffic light to make her pick up a phone. Not birthdays, not holidays, not even Evan's damn accident. A billboard. That was what did it. I wondered if she sat in her car under that billboard, blinking up at me while holding a grocery bag full of the same frozen lasagna she'd fed us when we were kids. Did she feel pride, guilt, or was it just fear? Fear that I had become someone so completely untouchable that she'd never get the chance to apologize. I went to work the next morning like nothing had changed. Smiled at the receptionist, sipped my overpriced coffee, handled a case involving a woman who was fighting for custody of a child that wasn't biologically hers. And through all of it, that voicemail echoed in my pocket like a heartbeat. I didn't tell anyone, not my assistant, not my colleagues, not even my closest friend Maya, who had stuck by me through law school and knew enough about my family to understand what that call might mean. It was mine, my secret, my power. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I wasn't aching for them to see me. They had seen me now, and they didn't know what to do with it. And I wasn't about to make it easier for them. It started with a second voicemail. This one not from my mother, but from Evan. And even though I hadn't heard his voice in more than 8 years, I recognized the forced calm in his tone, the way he spoke like someone trying not to step on a landmine, cautious but still carrying the smugness he'd always worn like cologne. "Hey, Rach," he began, as if we had just spoken last week, as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't disappeared from the family without so much as a wave goodbye. "Mom's not doing great. She's been crying a lot, and, Dad's the same. You know how he is. I think they want to see you. We all do. I mean, it's been a while." Then there was a pause, a hesitation so long it almost made me think he was going to hang up. But then he added, "We're having dinner Sunday night, 7 o'clock. Just us. It would mean a lot." I must have played that message 5 times, sitting at my kitchen island, my laptop open in front of me with depositions I was supposed to be reviewing for a divorce case involving a couple with matching sports cars and matching mistresses. I was trying to stay focused, trying to push the voice away, but it clung to me like smoke, curling into the corners of my mind no matter how hard I tried to exhale it. There was something in Evan's voice that I couldn't pin down, something too practiced to be pure, but too vulnerable to be entirely fake. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't want closure, and I didn't want to reconnect, but I did want them to see me. Not the girl who asked for too much, not the one they laughed at over dinner like I was a cartoon character chasing an anvil dream, but the woman I had become, the woman they helped create by pushing me so far away I had no choice but to become fireproof. I didn't RSVP, I didn't text back, I just showed up. Dressed in a black silk blouse, wide-leg slacks, and heels that clicked against their old front porch like a metronome counting down to confrontation. The house looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd just outgrown the scale of everything they built. The front yard was the same patchy grass and uneven walkway. The porch light flickered like it always had. There was a new mailbox, shiny and pretending to be modern, but everything else felt like a photograph someone had forgotten to update. I stood there for a long moment, wondering if I should just turn around and disappear for another decade. But then the door opened. It was Mom who answered, wearing one of her old cardigans and that same half-tired, half-nervous smile she used to give me when she didn't know what else to say. "You look incredible," she said, like the words had been stored somewhere deep and had to be forced to the surface. She stepped back and gestured for me to come in, and I walked into my past like it was a museum where nothing had been dusted. The smell hit me first. Roast chicken, probably with too much rosemary, and that burnt sugar scent of overbaked rolls. The table was already set, but the real detail that caught me off guard were the framed photos lining the walls and shelves. Still mostly Evan, still mostly his baseball trophies, his senior photo, his graduation, his trip to Thailand, his attempt at an art show, all of it. I counted 6 pictures of him within 20 seconds. Of me, 1, maybe 2, both at ages where I still had bangs and braces. It wasn't surprising. It was just disappointing to see the museum hadn't added any new exhibits. Dad was sitting at the table, already halfway through a beer, wearing the same zip-up fleece he wore when I left. "Rachel," he said, nodding as if I were an unexpected neighbor dropping off mail. No hug, no smile, just a name, spoken like a fact. Evan came in from the kitchen, holding a tray of mashed potatoes like he was playing house. He looked older, more tired around the eyes, maybe from the crash, maybe from the guilt, but he still carried himself like the world was slightly tilted in his favor. Dinner started with small talk. They asked about Phoenix like it was a curiosity, not a city I had lived in for nearly a decade. I gave short answers, sipped my wine, let them squirm in the spaces they used to fill with assumptions. Evan talked about his startup in vague, ridiculous terms that sounded more like a group chat than a business. Dad nodded along like it was the next Tesla. Mom asked about my firm, and I gave her enough to feel informed, but not included. I kept my tone polite, professional, detached. I watched them watch me, and for the first time, I could see the distance not just between us, but within them, like they couldn't quite reconcile the image in front of them with the version they had archived in their minds. It wasn't until the plates were cleared that I finally pulled it out. A photograph, printed in color, sharp and glossy. It was me in my graduation gown, Columbia Law seal on the podium behind me, tassel hanging to the left. Smile tight but proud, I slid it across the table like evidence in a trial. This was 8 years ago, I said, my voice steady. You didn't know because I didn't tell you. You didn't know because you didn't ask. Mom's hand flew to her mouth like something out of a movie. Dad blinked at the photo like it might change if he stared hard enough. Evan didn't say a word. The silence that followed was loud enough to shake the room. I sent you a message once, Mom whispered. On your birthday? It never went through? I laughed. Not cruelly, but truthfully. I changed my number the week I moved. I didn't want anything getting through. They didn't apologize, not outright. There were murmurs, fragments of regret. Sentences that started with, we didn't know, and you have to understand, and it wasn't that we didn't believe in you, but none of it landed. They still thought the hurt was about the money, about the tuition, about the Jeep Evan got. While I scrubbed floors and studied under flickering dorm lights. But the pain wasn't about things. It was about who got to matter. After dessert, which I didn't touch, I stood to leave. Mom followed me to the door, and for the first time, she didn't pretend. Her face crumpled as she said, "Please, just think about coming back into our lives." I looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "I didn't build this life just to let the same people break me again." Then I walked out, heels clicking once more, louder now, clearer. And this time, I didn't leave a note. The thing about endings, real endings, not the neat packaged ones in stories, but the jagged, unresolved ones life hands you, is that they rarely feel like endings at all. They feel like pauses, like breaths held just a moment too long, like someone left the door open but never walked back through it. When I left their house that night, the air smelled like dry grass and overcooked rosemary, and I could still hear the faint murmur of my mother's voice behind the closed door, repeating my name as if the sound alone could undo the years between us. I walked to my car with a clarity I hadn't expected to feel, a weightless certainty that the person I was had finally broken free from the echo of the girl I used to be. I had told them the truth. I had laid it on the table between the mashed potatoes and their uneasy glances, and yet it didn't feel like triumph. It didn't feel like revenge. It just felt necessary. The voicemail was still on my phone. Her voice. Trembling, uncertain, reaching for something she couldn't quite grasp. I'd listened to it the night before dinner, and again afterward, and this time it sounded different. Not because the words had changed, but because I had. There was something almost pitiful in the way she said my name, like she was calling out to a version of me that no longer existed. The woman she had ignored into invisibility had outgrown the space they left for her, and now her only remaining function was to haunt the edges of their memories. I hit play one last time, let the voice wash over me like a final rainstorm before a long drought, and then I deleted it. Not with anger, not with a heavy heart, just with finality, like cleaning a wound that had finally stopped bleeding. The next few weeks passed in silence, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It wasn't the aching, empty kind. It was clean, pure, like the quiet after a verdict is read. I went back to work, focused on a messy custody battle involving 2 men and a surrogate who had changed her mind mid-pregnancy. It was emotionally draining, complicated, and required a level of empathy that felt foreign after everything I had just endured. But I poured myself into it because I knew the difference now between obligation and choice. I wasn't here because I had to prove anything to anyone anymore. I was here because I could. Because I had made myself into someone who mattered not because of her last name or her parents' praise, but because of her goddamn work. And still, in the quiet corners of my mind, I kept wondering what they were thinking. If they sat at the same table each night and stared at the space I had filled. If Evan tried to patch up the cracks with stories of his startup. If Dad ever said my name without clenching his jaw. Then the text came, short, cold, unmistakably his voice. Dad has cancer. We didn't want to tell you before. No punctuation, no explanation, no plea, just a declaration thrown out like bait, like the final card in a game I hadn't agreed to play. I read it 3 times, then placed the phone down like it might bite me. Cancer, the kind of word that demands a response, that sits in your chest like an anchor, whether you want to feel its weight or not. I stared at the wall for a long time, thinking of him in that fleece jacket, nodding at me like I was someone else's kid. I tried to summon grief, but what came instead was memory of birthday parties he missed, of lectures that were really insults, of that night at the dinner table when he laughed at my dream like it was a punchline. I thought about how he had treated Evan's failures like bumps in the road, and my ambition like an inconvenience. And then I thought, maybe this was the last time they'd try to pull me back in. Maybe they weren't asking for forgiveness. Maybe they were just afraid that they would disappear from this world and leave behind nothing but my silence. I didn't respond right away. I didn't rage or cry or pace the room. I went for a walk, past the courthouse, past the billboard that still bore my face, though the colors had started to fade under the desert sun. I watched people pass beneath it, unaware that the woman smiling down at them was standing just across the street, wondering what it meant to be seen too late. I stood there for 10 minutes, maybe more, and tried to feel something resembling compassion. And I did. Briefly, I felt it stir, but then I remembered how I used to sit in my room at 16, rewriting college applications they refused to help with, folding laundry they never thanked me for, listening to them praise Evan for existing while I practically begged to be noticed. Cancer doesn't wipe that slate clean, not for me. Still, I'm not heartless. I booked a flight, not to stay, not to reunite, just to show up, to look him in the eyes one more time and see if he still recognized the daughter he spent so long overlooking. Maybe I'll sit beside him for 5 minutes. Maybe I'll walk out without saying a word. I haven't decided yet, but I'll be there, not for them, but for me. Because sometimes revenge isn't about screaming or breaking things or writing people out like bad characters in a better story. Sometimes it's showing up, whole and unbothered, just to remind them what they lost. Not to offer forgiveness, but to withhold it. She cried. I didn't. And maybe that's the real ending. Or maybe it's just the start of a silence that finally feels like peace.